This really shouldn't be controversial. Discussion about NASCAR's charter system should put you to sleep and be used as filler for the stock car news cycle. However, not only has it remained a constant in online discussions all year, but it actually threatens the entirety of the sport of NASCAR if something isn't done about it sooner rather than later. So how did this all happen? What is the damn thing and who got us into this mess? Well, NASCAR's charter system is deceptively simple. It's basically a pseudo-franchise system like the NFL or NBA might have. It was set up in 2016 in an agreement between NASCAR and the RTA, the Racing Team Alliance, a sort of collective bargaining organization made up of NASCAR team owners. It guarantees starting spots, there were 36 of them awarded to the top 36 in owner points at that time, and they even guaranteed payouts per races and a cut of TV broadcasting rights money, something teams have been trying to get a hold of since the 1960s. The idea was this would give added permanent value to NASCAR teams, as when teams went bust, their owners were usually in debt up to their eyeballs, and the only way to settle their debts was to sell all of their assets, the race shop, cars, equipment, etc. But that's all proprietary stuff, it's purpose-built for NASCAR stock cars, and the owners could rarely get enough cash for these things to cover their debts unless another team magically got formed right as they shut down to buy them all up. Usually they sold everything they owned for pennies on the dollar. Most racers who shot for the stars oftentimes ended up with nothing, and in some cases with ruined lives. With the charters though, they would get to sell something that had, in theory, everlasting value. And as long as NASCAR brought in more money, the charter holders would as well, right? That agreement is set to expire at the end of the 2024 season though, and things have changed a lot since then. One part of the charter system stipulated that teams could sell or lease charters between one another, but no team could hold more than 4 at a time. Since the initial agreement, those things have gotten expensive though. In 2016, Front Row Motorsports bought a charter from BK Racing for $2 million. This year, at the beginning of 2024, Spire Motorsports bought the charter of Live Fast Motorsports for $40 million. In 8 years, the price of a single charter had increased by 20 times its initial value. But that's good, right? That's what we want. Permanent, everlasting value. And no one charter is more valuable than any other. It doesn't matter if you buy a charter from a backmarker or Hendrick Motorsports, they do the same thing. Give you a starting spot, a cut of ad revenue, and payouts for races and end-of-year points finishes based on performance. Yes, charters getting up there in value is a good thing until you have a lot of new teams like Spire, 2311, and Trackhouse show up and buy a couple of them to start a race team. They take on tens of millions in debt right off the bat, with no cars even to their name yet. But these newer teams are structured more like investment opportunities than old-fashioned race teams. Spire Motorsports is a part of Spire Holdings, which also owns some minor league teams, as well as some other business ventures. Trackhouse has financial backing from musician Pitbull, and 2311 is backed by cash supplied by none other than Michael Jordan. These guys expect to make money off of the TV deals or one day selling the charters for way more than what they bought them. But there's a problem with all of that. NASCAR's business model is not very friendly with its cash payouts. Jeff Gordon even said in an interview that Hendrick Motorsports doesn't even make money. He says they haven't made a profit in nearly 10 years. Yeah, nearly 10 years, like, right around the time that charter agreement got signed. Yeah, TV broadcasting rights money only ever dwindled since 2016. Ratings have stabilized in the last 2 years, but for a while they were in a tailspin. That put a damper on the TV revenue sharing, but with a new $7.7 billion TV and streaming deal, we should be all good to go, right? Not necessarily. The way the payouts for broadcasting rights work is this. NASCAR gets 10%, the teams get 25%, with the remaining 65% going to the tracks. That seems more than fair, with NASCAR taking a tiny cut and the teams getting 2.5 times more than that. But the payouts are way over proportion for the tracks, and there's the rub. In 2019, NASCAR bought ISC, International Speedway Corp., and they own the majority of NASCAR tracks: Martinsville, Daytona, Talladega, Watkins Glen, Michigan, and a whole host of others. NASCAR always had a partnership with ISC to the point that they were basically a subsidiary to them, but now they own them outright, and cash could flow freely from one bank account to the other. So in reality, NASCAR's cut isn't 10% of the TV money, it's more like 48%, as they own 58% of all the tracks, so they get 58% of that 65% of the track owner cut, plus the initial 10%. This means that NASCAR has a positive cash flow of an estimated $140 million each year, which is the most they've ever had. For a sport supposedly in decline, they seem to be doing all right for themselves. But hey, I'd be doing really well too if I just found a way to make somebody else's money my money. All this means that the negotiations to re-up on the charter agreement set to expire at the end of 2024 got pretty tense. The teams weren't stupid. They saw what NASCAR did and they wanted more than 25% of the TV money. Talks stalled so badly that the RTA just walked out multiple times, and NASCAR dug their heels in because if no deal was signed, then the charters just went away, and we went back to pre-2016 NASCAR, and those TV revenue payouts were in the wind. Plus, those teams that had spent tens of millions of dollars to get a charter now had nothing to show for it. Not only that, but many drivers wanted a complete overhaul of the business model entirely. Right now, NASCAR pretty much owns everything the sport has to offer, from merch rights to broadcasting rights to the tracks and everything in between. And I want you to take a step back and appreciate the evil genius of the business model that they've created and just the absolute scale of their control over every facet of the sport. 25 years ago, the sport was very different. Back then, teams were not guaranteed starting slots, and tracks themselves negotiated broadcasting rights deals with NASCAR getting a cut of it. But what channel it was on and how much was signed for on the dotted line was completely up to track management. This meant that the races would be held on a staggering number of channels. They were different week to week, and I vividly remember my grandma at the beginning of every year taking the first copy of NASCAR Scene that had the broadcast schedule, cutting it out, laminating it, and hanging it up in the kitchen for all to see. You literally had to do that back then just to keep up with it. But in 2001, NASCAR consolidated all the TV rights for themselves and would negotiate on the track's behalf. This simplified the broadcast schedule immensely. Now there were two channels, Fox and NBC. Fox had the first half, NBC had the back half. Easy peasy. Little did anyone know it at the time, but that was the first piece that NASCAR placed on their side of the board, and it would hardly be the last. By the time the mid-2000s came around, ISC, that NASCAR affiliated company we talked about earlier, owned most of the tracks. They had bought California and Michigan from Roger Penske, they bought Richmond and Martinsville, they even went out and built Kansas and Chicagoland. Now they were getting more TV money than ever. The second piece had been acquired. Next, they worked on merch rights. Previously, teams leased out merchandising rights individually, and even rolled out their own merch trailers from track to track. Every team, no matter how big or small, had a merch trailer or a tent selling their t-shirts, die-cast, and all sorts of other knickknacks. By the late 2000s, NASCAR consolidated that too, and later even gave exclusive merch rights to Fanatics. Now all the merch was sold on the grounds of the track by NASCAR, with the teams just getting a tiny cut. Kyle Larson once said he made more selling his dirt racing merch in one weekend at some random podunk dirt track than he made from his NASCAR merch deals in an entire year. But it wasn't because people weren't buying. It was just all that money was going directly into NASCAR's pockets. In 2016, there was the charter agreement, which meant there were now haves and have-nots in NASCAR. Non-charter teams could still race, but without a cut of the TV money and no guaranteed starting spots, it just wasn't worth it unless the track had a big cash payout like Daytona or Talladega. Meaning that at most tracks, the field was comprised of the 36 charter teams, and that's it. In 2019, NASCAR got a hold of ISC and got the TV money from the tracks directly. And in 2022, they introduced the next gen car. Previously, teams built their own cars from the ground up, using whatever parts they could find that would adhere to a predetermined rules package. Now the cars were all spec chassis and bodies and cost more than twice as much as previous Gen 6 cars. Fabricators were laid off, and even the basic parts like brakes, springs, and fuel pumps could only be bought from specific NASCAR-approved suppliers, and you had better believe that NASCAR has their fingers in those pies too. How much does it cost to become a NASCAR-approved parts supplier? Who knows, but I can tell you one thing, it ain't cheap. And you better not be caught using counterfeit parts or else you'll face hefty fines and points penalties. So just to recap, NASCAR owns the broadcasting rights and they negotiate on your behalf. They own most of the tracks. They own the merchandising rights and negotiate that too. They control the charters, which determines starting slots and ad revenue streams for the teams, and they can take them away at their discretion. And they even own the cars and tell the teams how they can build them. And it's not just that either. They petitioned for the government of Florida to exempt Daytona 500 tickets from state sales taxes, and eventually Governor DeSantis signed that into law. This is cartoon villain type shit right here. Like, take a minute to just marvel at it. The discipline of it. This wasn't an accident. All of this was a plan. A plan measured not in months or years, but in decades. This is not the work of a drug-addled mind. This is the work of clear, sober genius. You want to know what my completely baseless conspiracy theory is? I think Jim France has been running NASCAR since way before 2018. I mean, this charter stuff has got his fingerprints all over it. Brian France couldn't stay sober for a weekend, let alone orchestrate this tangled mess of ruthless consolidation. This is the work of someone with a clear vision and the means and willpower to get it done, not things you find in the mind of an addict. And to top it all off, when Brian France got arrested in 2018, NASCAR kept trudging along. They named Jim France, the brother of Bill France Jr., as CEO, and everything kept running smoothly. It was almost as if nothing had changed at all. They say true power never reveals itself, and Jim France lives up to that. Even though he's the CEO of the sport, he doesn't appear in the media hardly ever. His appearances on YouTube are sparse, and he probably never wanted to be the public CEO, but his shithead nephew forced him into it. In the meantime, though, a new charter agreement has been signed by all the teams except 23XI and Front Row Motorsports, and it extends through 2031. TV revenue payouts have increased by an additional 10%, and with a bigger TV and streaming deal, that should mean some significant cash flow. But allegedly, unspecified other rights were waived in order to lock down the TV money. As for the holdouts, Front Row has stated they do not wish to comment on it, and 23XI had this to say about the situation. The specifics of their hangups remain between them and NASCAR though. However, it's worth noting that these are the only two teams eyeing to buy a new charter going into 2025, so that probably has something to do with their decision. Hey, Slapshoes from the future here. As it turned out, 23XI and Front Row Motorsports have entered a joint lawsuit against NASCAR citing antitrust laws, saying that NASCAR is a monopoly. I'm no legal expert, I don't know if they have standing for this, but I will say this. Back in the 80s, Donald Trump, yes, that Donald Trump, owned a USFL team and sued the NFL pretty much for the same reason, citing that they were a monopoly. He won his lawsuit but was awarded like $1 or something. So yeah, even if they win, it doesn't mean that they're gonna get what they want. Also, it came out that Richard Childress says that he was basically forced to sign the charter agreement, saying that NASCAR gave him all of 6 hours heads up to sign an electronic document saying that he agreed to it. And if he didn't sign, he wasn't going to get his charter. He has something like 300 employees, he really needed that money, so he signed it under duress. That will probably also come into play. Right now, this whole thing's up in the air, so who knows which direction we're gonna go. Anyway, back to the video. But since they haven't signed the agreement, that would mean the 4 charters held by those 2 teams are now in NASCAR's hands, starting in 2025, unless they sign some sort of deal in the near future. And to add to that consolidation rant from earlier, NASCAR has openly floated the idea of fielding their own teams under the France family. Having the sanctioning body also compete in their sport opens itself up for all sorts of conflicts of interest, as seen in IndyCar where Penske teams and the Penske-owned series cheated by having unlimited amounts of push-to-pass boost on their cars, something that didn't come to light until a month after the first race of the season. Should we expect similar levels of fuckery should NASCAR go down this route and start running its own teams? Yes, obviously yes. Have you not been paying attention to the last 20 years of NASCAR officiating, trying to manufacture the outcomes of races and championships? Of course they're going to try to put their finger on the scale. So where do we go from here? To be honest, I don't know. We'll probably go through the same song and dance in 2031, and I bet that the holdouts want the charters to become permanent and only negotiate about TV revenue sharing and the next big thing coming down the pipe, gambling revenue sharing. That'll become a sticking point one of these days, just you wait. I can say one thing definitively though. I've studied NASCAR for a long time, and years before I ever made the first upload on this channel, all that I had learned about NASCAR only ever pointed towards one thing. Money gets spent, teams come and go, people win some and lose some at the roulette wheel of racing, some stand up to big NASCAR with varying results, but eventually, without fail, when it comes to what NASCAR wants, in the end, the house always wins. Hey, in addition to this video, I also have a collaboration with Ellie Productions out on his channel, which went up yesterday, so you guys get a 2-for-1 special. Be sure to check out that video. It's about my favorite topic, the 1992 NASCAR Cup Series finale down in Atlanta. Links on the end screen now, down in the description, and pinned comment. Anyway, I'm Slapshoes, thanks for watching, and until next time, y'all take it easy.